Alfred, do we have some of the answers?
Do we have? Well, we do. I mean, it's quite interesting because in our Pacifica, we use at times a lot of emotive language. And yet, it's quite interesting that Professor Mason Jury talked about how that in Western thinking, there's this dualism between the subjective and the objective, and the mind and the heart working together. And yet he said that they're actually one and the same. And I think for Pacifica, it's the same thing too. When we're passionate about issues, we speak with an emotive language. And yet it's quite interesting now when you're talking to people around who they would prefer as a candidate, both for the mayor or for the council or local boards. They simply say this: we want to choose someone we can trust, someone we can have faith in, someone that we can believe in. So people are using this emotive language, and because in one sense their belief systems are important, because that's what it comes down to. Do we mean what we say, and do we say what we mean? Those things now are part of the integrity that we have. And sort of commenting about Pacifica, I suppose the church in one sense is one container in which it holds those values. And so our Pacifica people have gathered together in those places. Why? Because even though they may have been the Matais back in the islands, or the chiefs, and so when they came there, and often when they came here, they were either the cleaners or the cooks in their places of work. But when they came to the church, they regained their sense of status. So any migrant group finds its collective space. And so the church became a vehicle in which held those values that are of importance. And today, they still hold that. And even though there's been a trend where some of our second and third generation are moving away, guaranteeing when there are important events, they'll be there. Because there's the container of those values that are important. So I think that it's really important that when we're talking about how we connect with our Pacifica people, let's not be afraid to talk about that. And it's a simple thing like when we talk about faith, people automatically assume that to be a religious statement. And yet for us, it's not. It's a spiritual statement. Faith is not just about the sense of a belief whether it is in a God or not, but it's about faith in people. Faith that at times where faith has to be tested, that sometimes that people may sort of fall over, they may make a mistake, but how do you then grow their faith? By giving trust, forgiveness, all of those things are important. Just one last thing, just commenting about the comment about John Banks. And I think the thing is that there's been a lot of pressure at the moment. People and political commenters saying this is absolutely a boring election. People are asleep. And I think we were just waiting to see what was going to happen. So Paul Henry kicked it off, John Banks kicked it off. But isn't it interesting? It's the elephant in the room, because the reality, while we're all being nice, there's still an edge that I think that still exists out there. And I think that edge is not only just for one party or the other. I think that edge exists right the way through. Because I've experienced this interesting thing, like you said about the CNR thing, where people automatically assumed that I would take a certain position and a certain place. And yet, what I've found is that as a Pacifica person, when I actually approached and talked about the possibility, it's almost like people say, oh, no, we'll do that on your behalf. And so I think there's this challenge where in one sense we're accepted, we're loved, we're cared for, we're celebrated and all the things that we can bring. But there's an edge where I think that people are unsure. Can I really trust a Pacifica person to actually be my leader? To be the person who's my counsellor on my behalf? Do I think that this person is more than just the statistics that we see in South Auckland? And can I just say this? There are more Pacific Islands than just in South Auckland. But South Auckland seems to get all the credit. And maybe because they're stronger in their voice. In fact, we often say, it's the league teams over there, they're more violent than the other Pacific Islanders like out west. We're passive, but we're still strong, you see. So, yeah, we don't throw our jandals anymore, But I think the thing is that, in regards to that, it's not just about South, and we keep branding, we keep boxing people. Look, the thing is, it's if we're going to be inclusive, our Pacifica people are right across the board. But there is a challenge, I think, for Auckland and for New Zealand, is that are we going to allow the next tier of leadership to step forward?
Yeah. And some might ask, do Pacific Islanders look like New Zealanders? Did I see a hand? Yeah, Dr. Fisiahi.
Yeah, John Banks' comment. Yeah, I think it's a good thing for Len Brown, because what he said is would unite the whole Pacific community in Auckland to vote for Len Brown. Because us living up south, we've got relatives living west, north, so living out there in the east. So they will all go for him. And that's although it's some bad comments, but so to speak. But anyone hearing the comments will have a feel for Len Brown, and it's a uniting force for the Pacifica people to vote for him.
Interesting comment, eh? First political one we've had this evening. What's the role of the church? Hey, we've got young people who might not be engaging in the processes, and we've often been told that they engage with their churches. Alfred, you've been a minister for a while. Is there a role the church can play in ensuring that the voice of Pacific is heard at this level?
I think that the church leaders have been good, in fact, in the work that we've been doing with the Ministry of Pacific Island Affairs and getting people enrolled and getting people to understand that they should be voting without necessarily telling them how, but it's just that communications mechanism that the people who wanted to say, how do we get everybody enrolled so they can vote this Saturday, we went to the church leaders and says, can you help with this? And I think that they have provided a very important conduit for information. So I think the churches are generally, on the surface anyway, apolitical, and that's the way they should be. But that doesn't mean they can't involve themselves in the mechanics of the political process and making sure that they educate their congregations about the importance of enrolling and voting and participating in the democratic structure. And I think if the churches play that role and do nothing else, it's a very important one, because it is a good place to be educating our people about the importance of democracy when we see people in the rest of the world shot, threatened, and as they were in Afghanistan or wherever it was they had the election recently. We take our vote for granted here compared to what other people have, and I think the church has got to get that message through, because they are the best communicators en masse with the Pacific community that we have in Auckland.
We've seen some real progress in the church around Lotu Mo'ui and Nuaola and some of those programs. Is it difficult for the church to, and I'm kind of looking this side, so I'm helping my camera people look this side too. Is it difficult for the church to say this is how the democratic process works, these are the mechanics of it, and not actually say, and by the way, we think Bessie was a really good candidate to vote for? Is that part of the challenge? This is part of our evolution in this country?
It was definitely part of the challenge for my church. I'll talk about my church because I know my church very well, but for Pastor Louis, it was definitely a challenge. We have lots of good relationships with City Council, with the central government, and with local boards existing at the moment. And a lot of our friends out in the community are also standing. So, and me being a church member of that church, or of our church, it was difficult for Pastor Louis to say, Pesio, stand up, everyone, this is Pesio, vote for Pesio. But what he did do was give us all an equal opportunity to speak. And I think, just going back, I think more so than ever, churches have become involved in political voting or political matters this time around. I do know that a large number of Pacific pastors got together and did a voting Sunday, and so they told all their congregation to bring their voting papers, and they didn't tell them who to vote for, who to tick, but actually went through the process and had it, explained what that box meant and what that, how many, because there were ticks and there were numbers, and so for a lot of our people it's confusing. So our pastors and our churches have really taken a leadership role this election, and I'm really glad, I'm really proud of that, because we do need to, a lot of that education happens from the pulpit and happens in the areas that we congregate in. So I just say that yes, definitely the church has a role to play in politics.
I should add to that, when it came to that preferences thing, where you rate them, I got confused. Yeah, okay, all right.
Can you imagine
I must
how
be the
our older mums and dads would have felt if we got confused?
Yeah.
I mean, my parents were absolutely confused, so yeah, needed some help.